We have the wonderful pleasure of talking with real leaders every day about amazing leadership insights, ideas, and issues. And I'm thrilled today to have with us the founders of qChange, James Kelley, Rob Buckingham, and John Howes. How are you guys doing today?
Awesome.
Great.
Are you doing good?
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, you're welcome. John and I met several years ago working in an organization. I met John. We reconnected recently, and I learned a little bit about qChange, but I honestly don't know all that I need to know about your organization and about this very interesting solution or tool or product. I don't know what you like to call it, but that's part of what has intrigued me to spend some time talking with you guys today, okay? And so because we are all about putting the right tools in front of the leaders that we have the pleasure to work with. All right. Hey, maybe we can start. James, you and Rob are the co-founders of this business, qChange, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how did you two meet? Can you tell us a little bit about your history? And maybe Rob, tell us a little bit about James. Can you introduce James for us?
Well, this should be really interesting. Go, Rob. Yeah.
Well. So, I like to describe our relationship as kind of a yin and yang, and we add John into the mix, and he kind of completes all of us together. But James and I are, we're very opposite in the way that we view the world, and the way that our experiences have evolved over our careers. And what's really exciting about I'll let James explain how we met, internet dating, by the way. But anyway, we complement each other because we see things differently, but we have a way of talking through issues or opportunities that brings out what I think is just a better overall solution. And so it's just been a pleasure to be part of the team and working with these two guys.
That was the most political introduction of me I've ever heard.
We had some team building over beverages Saturday night, and I got to watch them discuss an issue back and forth.
Yeah.
That's good. So you got a deeper level of insight. I know. James, we're just meeting, we don't know each other that well, but I know you're an author, right? Mm-hmm. You've authored the book, The Crucibles Gift, 5 Lessons from Authentic Leaders Who Thrive in Adversity, which I admit I haven't read yet, but it's intriguing. That's all right. And I love books.
Don't worry, there's many that haven't, but you can add to the list that have. That'd be great.
You've got a PhD, which your PhD, I assume, is in organizational behavior or leadership, or no? No? What's it in?
So I have a PhD out of University of Western Australia in Perth in consumer psychology.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm taking a different path.
Yeah, I'm sure that it comes in handy though, still, right?
Yeah.
And I just learned you've done quite a few interviews, a lot of podcasts and that type of thing, a lot of messaging around leadership. And Rob, you have a background in marketing too, don't you?
Well, my background is more in operations and product development.
Okay.
I worked for a Fortune 50 company for almost 20 years, and in between did a couple of startups as well. So, but I'll focus on a lot of product design and how to run a business.
Excellent. And then John, of course, you've got a PhD.
I do.
Most of your career has been in leadership development, right? I mean,
correct. Yeah.
We met, 2 decades ago for the first time. I think that's what you were involved in.
A couple years ago, or 2 decades, right? I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist. Big part of that 20 some years was internal in big organizations, Nike, Honeywell, a couple of others.
Yeah.
And then moved to external to consulting for the last decade on all these topics that we're going to talk about: leadership development, engagement, etc.
And so now you've gathered in beautiful Bend, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
That's where your headquarters is. That's where you get to hang out. You're making a lot of us jealous because of that. So qChange, what was the impetus?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Rob and I came at this for different reasons. I think for me, I avoided, my background is so diverse. And so, I started at 24 as opening the 41st office for a national ad agency. but I had no business doing it. I was grossly underqualified and I oversold myself to the nth degree. And so I got kind of burned early in the corporate world and just didn't feel like I fit. So I went down the academic side. But throughout all of that, I kept trying to start businesses. And the one area that I always felt like I wanted to improve upon as an individual was leadership. And so, when I had my old podcast, Executive After Hours, I interviewed so many different leaders that it inspired me and also helped me see opportunities that there's a better way to do it. When you come at it from a consumer psychology background, you always think about it from the consumer perspective, not the org psych perspective. And so with that, I started going down a certain path of developing qChange. And then when I met Rob, there was, I think, a minor pivot, but I think it was a better pivot overall. And so for me, when I started qChange, I was trying to basically fulfill what I think I probably was meant to do, because I'd always been trying to start consulting businesses and blah, blah, blah. And I just think academia is a slightly broken model.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so my passion lays in trying to create something, but more importantly, is trying to help humans just be better in a world that's just not kind right now.
It's not conducive to that, is it?
Yeah.
Or not as much as it could be. Well, that's great. And so how long ago did you and Rob meet?
Rob, you want to tell the story?
Yeah, well, I'll do as much justice as I can.
I heard the internet dating part, but I don't believe
that.
No, that's pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, James and I met online a year ago. James was a professor at one of the universities in Dubai. I can never remember exactly which one, but James had this concept for, and we'll get into the product later, but more about a nudging system for leadership that he had sent out through a little plug here for Angel List, sent out a notice saying, seeking, somebody who can, has some CTO, COO background that might, be interested in like a leadership product. And I was sitting in Ben just finishing up another product idea that we were building, and it's like, wow, this could be my next big thing. Because I love the next big thing, So I reached out to James. We started talking, realized that we had some complementary skill sets, and that we could actually make a go of this. And this was something we both had passion to do. And then we started talking with John. James had met John in one of your whirlwind tours of the U.S., James, and the three of us just started figuring out how we could pull this off.
But I will say what really was funny is that when I put my ad out, I said I'm looking for a CTO-ish, and Rob goes, "Would a COO-ish work?" and so there was like this little bit of a humor connection. I was like, "Oh, that's great," And then John, I actually stalked John early on because I was talking to his wife about Oregon State Cascade, about maybe teaching there. And she happened to mention her husband was an org psych IO guy. I was like, oh, can I meet him? Because I always see opportunity. So then I started stalking John. And I remember when I met John, when John sat down, he had no idea what he was sitting down for the first time I met John. And I sprung into it. He was like, whoa, what's happening? So
yeah, my only knowledge was that just some guy that I met briefly. My wife said, met briefly, wants to have coffee with you. And I sat down and yeah, James launched into big ideas and let's shake up the industry and let's make a big impact on the world and everybody's a leader and on and on and on, everything we're going to talk about. And, you want to come join us practically. And I was like, whoa, all right. This is intriguing. Yeah.
And that was after probably just 5 minutes because that's all James needs is 5 minutes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
Well, I'm intrigued because the work that I've done it's constantly, I'm going to steal your word nudge. It's nudged me to trying to figure out how to use technology. And I'm not a technology guy, but maybe I'm a leadership consumer minded guy, James, in that there's got to be a way that we can utilize technology better. And I think we get it wrong when we go down the path of e-learning and online learning. There's got to be a way we can create a technology system or tool that really does enable on-the-job, everyday learning, where leaders are learning within their natural, true leadership role, context of their actual job, right? As opposed to going online and just consuming, taking in, listening to a podcast while they're doing their work, right? That this becomes part of their work. And so that's what intrigued me. I believe that qChange is getting at that. I believe, right? So hopefully you can show that or tell us that. But let's back up just a minute, because I want to set the context just a little bit more. Based on your experience, it sounds like, between the three of you, you've had quite a bit of experience working with and helping corporate leaders, organizational leaders. Where do you see the biggest struggle? What is it? Because I agree with you, James. Even though there's great talent out there and there's wonderful individuals that want to do the right thing, something sucks the vitality out of their growth and development, right? Mm-hmm. And the organizations they're working in, it depletes them almost every day. So it's a major task just to stay somewhat, maintain the status quo, let alone grow. What have you found? What's the biggest struggle from your vantage point?
I actually want to bring John's voice into this because I think John can resonate it and speak to it really clearly.
Yeah, I'll just bridge from the meeting with James, the stuff that he was talking about and how you teed this up, Mark, is exactly what I was experiencing, whether consulting to, big global organizations or when I was internal in organizations. It's this idea that we lift people up, we bring them over here, we do 4 days of very expensive leadership training. And it's a lot of places, it's world class, it's really good. Bad. But then you land back here and the pressure and the tasks and all that overwhelm you. And you lose a lot of that from over here. So we try to bring this, and we'll talk about it more, but into just like you said, Mark, into the flow of work, into learning as you go, learning by doing, getting quick feedback from people, etc. So we'll go through the nudge cycle, but it was super intriguing to me, and also a little bit humbling, where I'm like, I know a lot of my 20 some years haven't been as impactful as I wanted to be because of this issue that we're talking about. So
that's probably why you jumped at this, because you saw that this could really be a good.
I figured let's go from 400,000 some IBMers to 300.
Yeah.
Plus,
during COVID.
In Oregon, right? So yeah. Well, let's take a look then. I don't know how you want to get started, but I'd love to learn about qChange, about the tool that you have. So when you think about, just to give some backdrop to our philosophy and our methodology, from a consumer psychology perspective, from a consumer perspective, we know from research that if you can inform a consumer immediately before they go in to purchase a product about your particular product, the likelihood that they buy that product increases dramatically because it's top of mind. So this is why you see point of sales at the end of shopping aisles. This is why you see or hear, even in music sometimes in stores, they'll drop product names. This is why scents, meaning like smells, are delivered inside grocery stores. All of this is to nudge an individual to consume a particular product. I mean, this is why typically, and not always, but typically when you go into, for example, a Safeway or a grocery store, you go to the fruit and veg because you feel much better about getting that in your grocery cart so that you can buy the junk later on, right? So it's a psychological nudge. And so when you look at just the research around nudging, the closer to the point of action, the more likelihood that the individual is going to do whatever behavior you're trying to get them to do. So that's half of our philosophy. But the other side of the philosophy then is getting the feedback. And the reason why this quantitative and written feedback is so important to what we do is that it allows a sense of accountability and confirmation. And it allows you to test your self and other perception in the real time. And that's important. Often how we see ourselves isn't it how others see us, right? There's this perception gap that's quite often we have our public self and our private self, and not to go down this path, but that's really critical. But here's the last part of the piece of the puzzle that is really, really important. I think what John was alluding to earlier, and even in you, Mark, is this idea of actually getting content to help you grow in the context that you need to consume that content. And so what we've done is created really a behavioral thread from nudge to learning in real time with low friction in the flow of your day.
And so if you were to look at the diagram and you start with number one, our solution really identifies a meeting. And why is that important? Well, understanding who's in that meeting is really important to figure out who can be basically your support for growing as a leader. So it identifies not only the leader, but also identifies the individuals that the leader has selected to help them grow. And for lack of vernacular, and please, John and Rob, jump in when you want, it's in essence as close to a 360 as you can get. We prefer to say, hey, get someone above you, someone that you're managing, and some of your peers, because all of their perspectives are going to vary on you as a leader.
Right.
There's different intent, there's different perceptions, and we want to capture that in real time. So once we identify the meeting, literally 3 minutes before the meeting, you get sent a prompt or a nudge. Now, this could be, in our solution, that's one of 43 possible areas. And John did an amazing job creating what we call the lead model. So it's 12 dimensions and 43 different possible areas that someone could work on. So you'd get sent a prompt on one of those areas. Our go-to example is always succinct and direct. So to add some context to this, I'm going to use that again. So imagine that you're trying to work on being more succinct and direct in meetings as a leader. You would get that prompt immediately before the meeting.
And James, just to clarify, a meeting could be just a one-on-one conversation, I take it, right? With somebody, an event, right? Where you need to show up somehow as a leader with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the definition of a meeting is?
Yeah, so you can go from one-to-one or as big as you want.
Right.
There's some nuances to our system that I can set up just really quickly. Is we want to ensure that anonymity is existing for not only really for the influencers, right? So in certain organizations, it could be toxic to give feedback, or in certain organizations, you might be intimidated by your leader, even if they're asking for your feedback.
Okay.
And so when it's 3 or less, all of that data that is collected is actually rolled up into the weekend summary.
Oh, okay.
And so we're still collecting the data, and it's giving the individual a voice to help their leader grow. But 3 or more, the leader's getting delivered all content in real time once feedback is collected, aggregated, and then it's delivered.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So the leader, the individual, the participant is connected to the tool, but then that person also invites feedback providers to be connected relevant to a specific meeting or conversation or whatever, right?
Correct. So, and I apologize. I'm leaving a little bit of context out of here.
Okay.
So, our solution works in real-time collaboration tools.
Mm-hmm.
So Microsoft Teams, Slack, and G Suite is coming on later this year, and so we wanted to be where work is done.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
Like a leader doesn't need another tool, another app.
No.
What they need is something that can impact them in the ecosystem that they currently use. And so for a majority of organizations, especially larger ones, Fortune 1000, Fortune 10,000, a majority use Microsoft Teams. And so that was our primary go-to-market strategy, is be where a majority of business and knowledge workers are, which is in the Teams environment.
Yeah.
So a leader would create what we call a team or a channel, and they would invite those that they want to have as influencers into that particular channel.
Okay.
And so that allows not only specific individuals to be in that channel, but also protects from any one of the organizations to take part in it if the leader does not want them to be part of their growth. So it's a little bit of a wall, if you will.
Gotcha.
James,
So,
can I throw one ad in here?
Please.
So real quick, you mentioned 360s, right? And this idea of wrapping influencers around you to people who know you best, and like I think you said, Mark, people who see how you show up to the world, right? That's 360 like, in that we get a diverse perspectives all around you. But just to be really clear, and I've built and ran a lot of 360s in organizations, this is not that, because those often you get your results and they go in a drawer. Yeah. Right. And so this is almost like, and James will go into it here, a continual 360 over and over and over again where you can see your growth and development.
So those that are on here that are listening to this, we use the term close associates. We teach the leaders that we work with to identify close associates that they can go to on a regular basis that can help them see themselves in real-time leadership type situations. So this sounds like this could be a tool that could be used for them, and maybe even a little bit broader, but it's not a 360 survey like what you're talking about, John, right?
Yeah.
I love that. It's real time. It's ongoing, right?
The only thing 360 about it is the philosophy of selecting all of those around you that you think are close associates.
Right. Yeah.
That's the most 360 thing about it. Otherwise, to John's point, it's not.
It's not the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I assume that if you're getting ongoing data too, you can, and maybe I'm getting ahead, that you can see some trends.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Excellent.
So just back to the example of being nudged prior to the meeting, right? So on succinct and direct, after the meeting, this is where it really starts to get very interesting, is that I am given the ability to assess myself. So self-assessment. So maybe I give myself a 4 out of 5 on being succinct and direct, but my influencers that are in the same meeting as me may perceive that I was only a 2 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so in real time, that data is aggregated and delivered to me, the leader. So I'm getting a real time leader team perception gap, or leader influencer perception gap. That's an eye-opening experience right in itself, to say, oh, wow, there is a significant gap between myself and what people are perceiving.
Right.
But the real, I think, meat of the solution is my ability as a leader, if I choose, to ask for written feedback from that same group of influencers.
Yeah.
And that's where all the data is in terms of real content. And the way we design the feedback is that we wanted to break it down in a way that is really consumable for those giving feedback, but also consumable for the leader. And so we break it down into 3 boxes. We break it down into, what was the situation? The situation could be in the moment of a meeting, a heated debate. It could be a 12 o'clock meeting on budgeting. So whatever the situation was, whatever the action was. So, in using succinct and direct, the action may have been that I was droning on forever and ever about making a point that everyone got. And that happens quite a lot in meetings. Yeah. And then the impact from the associates part, or the influencer part, could be, I felt disengaged. I felt disvalued or unvalued in this particular meeting from my point of view. Right. And as a leader, you can't really argue with someone's feelings. I mean, that's what we should be teaching people. That's their emotional connection to the situation in that moment.
Yeah.
And so all of that then is delivered to the leader, again, in an anonymous form. And it allows the leader to read this and say, wow, okay. And that's the real, I think, meat and potato. But the follow on to that is that you also get what we call a Q insight that helps you think about that situation and being more succinct and direct differently. And so we're getting the nudge, the behavioral measurement, the qualitative feedback, and the learning opportunity, all in real time, all in less than 5 minutes a week, 10 opportunities across the week. And that's really significant when you think about maximizing the exposure, but minimizing the time, right? So you're maximizing the impact, and minimizing the time. And I know what we see a lot in the conversations that we're all having is that and John, you can speak to this 1,000 times more than I can. And Rob, you can too, from your experience at Intel, is that it's really tough to find space to focus on your development.
Yes.
True.
And I think what our solution allows for is the automation, if you will, of creating that space. And that space is limited in time, but huge impact in value. And so this is why we think it's so unique, is that it allows you to measure over time specific areas that you want to grow in to be better at what you do as a leader, whatever aspect that might be for you. Does that make sense, Mark?
It does, especially it's an infusion of leadership development. It's almost, I don't know, maybe it's not just creating space, it's actually taking advantage of the real-time space or helping you learn as you're leading, that, I guess, I don't know, but the leadership development shouldn't be ancillary. It should be, the best lesson is when you're in the game, right? You're learning the best when you're in the game, type of a deal. And so the influencer on your graphic, the influencer is synonymous with the feedback provider, or what we call the close associate. True?
Yes. We
Yeah.
have the ability to turn that on, so it's not anonymous. So there's some flexibility there, but we built it that way intentionally initially.
And so can an individual leader subscribe to this tool independent of their organization, or is it kind of an organizational solution?
Rob?
Well, there's really, Mark, two different models. But since we're delivered, our existing solution, it works with Microsoft in terms of Outlook and Office, and then Teams. The individual leader and their influencers have to have Outlook and Teams. So we're connected to the Microsoft solution. But if an individual leader wants to bring this solution as part of their Teams environment and start and install it through Teams and launch it, they absolutely can as an individual leader. In fact, that was one of our design philosophies, is that we wanted to make sure that we could bring leadership development to anybody who wanted it, right? Not just those that were selected because they might be hypos or because of their status in the organization, but I could be a new manager. And, maybe my new manager, frontline manager training starts in 9 months, but, why do I need to wait? I've got this, this solution right here. So we were really trying to design a system that could democratize this leadership development. So that's for the individual, but from an organization perspective, we can actually go into an enterprise solution, the enterprise, and just within a few hours install the system. It's really simple to install. We can even go as far as customizing, and John can talk more about how in his experience, where once you do the consulting work, you get a lot of ideas about how you want to drive those new behaviors into an organization. We can actually customize the nudge system and the feedback and insights to better match an organization's mission and operation imperatives. So we have both models, an individual model and an enterprise model.
So let me ask you on the model, John, you mentioned that you have this model, this construct that had 43, is it behaviors or
areas? You can think of it as competencies, dimensions,
which probably work beautifully, but I know how organizations are. They like to have, they may have their own set of stuff, right? So you can adjust it to fit their set of stuff, or are they constrained to your dimensions and so forth?
No constraints. We have our core model, which is, somewhat out of my experiences, but somewhat borrowing from the best, right?
Yeah.
And people can, like you said, like Rob was saying, just come right into our system and start using it with that model. James, throughout Intel, enough people from Intel are starting to use this. We can go approach Intel and talk about, hey, let's make this even better for you by Intelizing it, right? Where we fit within your talent management systems, processes, your culture, your leadership models, your values, etc. So totally customizable to.
That's great.
To meet your needs. We don't want this to be outside the system. We want it to fit within your talent ecosystem.
Yeah.
And as an operations guy, I always like to talk about measurement. And so, one of the things that I really enjoy about both the individual model and the enterprise model is that as an individual, we calculate a leader score. So you can actually be tracking your growth as you're using the system. Really, from my perspective, if you're measuring it, you can manage it. But from the enterprise perspective, imagine how great it would be to understand how many of your leaders might be working on diversity and inclusion, as a behavioral theme. How many might be working on operational excellence, right? Again, as a corporate theme. And we can start tracking how the growth is occurring in the organization through some measurements there that we're building.
Talk about, Mark, a real-time needs analysis, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back to the idea of, I rate myself on a given behavior or competency area focus. and then I get feedback, real-time feedback in the context of a specific encounter or meeting, as you've defined it. And there could be a gap between how I saw myself and how others saw me. And these are people that I've chosen that I consider to be close associates, right? They're giving me meaningful feedback, but there's still a gap, which to me is always, that's kind of the Johari window blind spot area.
Exactly.
That if I'm open to that, you know, just like Jim Collins and Good to Great, you know, seek the truth, that allows me, it enables me to see that's where you can go to a deeper level of understanding and them in a narrative type feedback where they're describing more of what they experienced, right?
Yeah.
And then you uncover some of those things that maybe the numbers just give you the red flag so that you can dive deeper into a certain area if you choose to do that. Do I have that right?
Yeah. And you know, I don't want to be salesy, so if you're okay with that, I'd love to show you what it looks like in Teams so you can get a sense.
I was about to ask you that. So.
Okay. So there's I'll give you some caveats of what you're going to see, but let me pop it up for you.
Where are you at with this tool in terms of, if I use the term going to market, are you preparing to take it to market, or is it being used by consumers, leaders right now?
Yeah, being used. We launched about 6 weeks ago in the Microsoft Teams, what's called App Source. And depending on your organization, if they've enabled what's called third-party apps to show up within Teams, if a company has enabled that, then you can actually install qChange right now.
Okay.
And everything is a 30-day free trial, so you could install it and start getting those nudges and creating those feedback loops today. So we're pretty excited about being in App Source. It was it's a big thing to get certified through the Microsoft process.
Awesome. Yep. It's all web-based. They're not installing, so that you clear a lot of hurdles with their internal IT restrictions, things like that, I take it.
Right. And yes, as to your point, we actually have nonprofits, higher education, and corporate customers just within the last 6 weeks of launch.
So, and really, we're partnering up with consulting groups focused on coaching, focusing on, you know, changing culture in terms of engagement, employee experience.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really positive use cases going on that I'm excited to have James show you here.
So what you're seeing is really the interface, and this is the unique chat bot that we've created, right? And so when you initially sign in, you would create your own team, which would be this here. And in doing so, I just simply added, you see how easy it is to do. I just simply added these different people to my channel, right? So it's pretty easy. And then these are the only ones that would ever be able to actually evaluate me in the meeting. So if I'm in a meeting and this is a fake person, but if Della Street was there and John, they would be the only ones that would evaluate me in that particular meeting if Randy and Rob aren't there. So it's really driven by the calendar in terms of who's in that particular meeting.
Okay, I get you. All right.
Yeah.
And so, do they, just to back up, they get nudged too?
After.
Okay.
So we had a really, I think robust, might be a little heavy-handed, but we had an internal debate about whether the influencers in the meeting should also know what you're working on. Oh. And the philosophy that we came up with is that as a leader, if I'm not making it obvious in terms without blatantly stating I'm working on X, but if my actions aren't demonstrating that, then there's a good chance I'm not actually demonstrating it. So if they don't witness it, then the theory is that I'm not demonstrating it. And that to me makes sense. But it
does.
Yeah. So on the screen, you're seeing this is the actual function. And so, we had a meeting just before this one, and I got nudged on, because I initiated the meeting. So I got nudged in this meeting. Think about all the places where you can add a unique value and follow through with at least one. So that was the nudge I got, right? And so I'm trying to communicate I'm working on communicating the unique value as a leader, right? My leadership branding, if you will. I don't think I did a very good job of it, so I gave myself a 2. So you would see the data here, but one of the participants, our acting CTO, didn't give me an evaluation. So we have a feedback window that is open for 3 hours. So at the end of 3 hours, if Rob and John gave me feedback, that would be delivered here in real time.
Okay.
So that's why you're not seeing that. But what's interesting is, I'm just trying to scroll up to an example here. Where is the weekly card? Is at the end of each week, you can see what your average score is for the week, what you were working on, how many nudges you received, the average self-rating, the average influencer rating, and my average perception gap, right? And so you're kind of getting this week by week, but what it results in is this dashboard. And so one of the things, and Rob mentioned this earlier from a metric standpoint, is that we have the ability, and this is why we really perceive ourselves closer to really a predictive leader analytics company, is that we can measure a leader's ability to lead across the organization or across our whole solution. So if this is a unique instance inside a company, this is really valuable information about which leaders are excelling on the areas that they're working on and which ones aren't. And there's a whole slew of outcomes for that if you want to go into, John can really explain. But what this allows us to do is show trends of how you're growing compared to others. And, unfortunately, which we're solving now, the idea of having 3 or more is really important to get the data. Mm-hmm. Right. And so when it's an individual, all those scores get rolled up to here. So the one-on-one meeting, if you will. And so for me, unfortunately, you're not seeing the data, but what you would see here is you would see the average, you would see the self-rating, the average influencer rating would come here and the average gap, and you would have all the content in terms of the written content. So unfortunately, this is not the greatest example. We're working on that, and I apologize. But that's due to being a small team growing. So send your resumes. Just kidding. And so what you would see here in this little line would be the perception gap, seeing how above or below or how big is your gap. And that's really important, is because the idea is that your gap is narrow, right? You're acting how you want perception to be, so to speak. And then you would have your average self-rating and then your average influencer rating. And so, we think this is a really powerful tool to allow people to see and collect data over time, right? And that's really the only way you're growing is over time, because, Mark, as behavior change doesn't happen on a light switch, right? It's like doing a marathon. Mm-hmm. And so you need to see that growth. Not only do you need to see it from an affirmation standpoint, like, great, I'm doing it. Great, I'm making a difference, but also, when did I fall short and what was happening in that moment in my life? Was there a family issue? Was there something in the work environment? Did I just get promoted? Like, whatever it is. And so you can align context really well with the results that you're getting in these different meetings that you're going to. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, you guys know this. In fact, Rob, you lived in this world, it sounds like. Probably all 3 of you have. There's a lot of managers out there that want to be good leaders, and they are data driven. They like numbers, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They don't like nuances as much as they like numbers. And this puts a little bit of measurement to some very important, I don't know what the right word is, non-measurable type stuff without this kind of a tool. And I got to tell you, I love the idea of the gap. This is a tool that turns their everyday work life and leadership efforts into the classroom.
Yep.
I love that. And I love the idea that it helps them see where the gaps are. And it just occurred to me as you were talking, James, that if you never had any gaps, that's not necessarily a positive. That could be some other team dynamic that you need to work on, right?
Yeah.
And if you have a huge gap as a leader, you shouldn't necessarily view that as a negative. That's an opportunity to learn more and discover, especially then if there's some trends. You can also see, as you mentioned, James, over time, you can see what kinds of improvements or, changes you're making. So,
I mean, let's just take the perspective of the influencers are constantly rating you higher than yourself. Well, then that shows you have a competency that you don't perceive that you have, and that's a confidence builder.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really important. There's the other side of that as well, where I'm giving myself 4s, my team's giving me 2s.
Right.
And that's a kick in the pants, but that's a real important awakening for a leader to realize, oh man, okay, I'm really out of alignment.
So then when you get, James, that I was going to go there, because we often go to the examples where I'm doing way worse than I think I am, right? But there's, if you flip it, is a confidence boost, like you said, but then you can also ask for qualitative feedback about that positive gap and learn what worked and learn from goodness so that you can do more of that, right? You can, your influencers can tell you, well, yeah, I'm giving you this high score because you did X, Y, Z. And then you know to repeat X, Y, Z.
Well, and what's awesome about that, John, I love that point, is that, there's a whole string of literature around appreciative inquiry and the power of AI around good begets good, right? So when you learn from excellence, it actually speeds up everything in the organization. And so I think that's a huge asset to this tool.
That's awesome.
And Mark, if I could do one more here, like think about, we focus on the individual, but you do a lot of work with teams. Think about the sort of the culture change aspect, the building trust aspect within a team that can come from this. And then organizationally, I've been in a million talent management meetings where we're talking about succession planning and all that. Think about bringing real data where we know that this next role needs these 5 areas to be strong. And we can look for people that are maybe not as, you wouldn't have thought of them originally for that role, but you can see that their influencers all around them are rating them strong in those 5 areas. And you can consider that person that maybe is quiet or is not necessarily who you'd think of originally for that role, and bring a more data-based decision than the subjectiveness that occurs in those talent management meetings.
Yeah, and I assume that with the enterprise solution, the organization can decide whether they're going to keep it as confidential data or make it open where they can review it and see it, right? So it's either
a lot of configuration possibilities with the enterprise model.
Excellent. Well, so where do you envision this going? Different languages? How big is this going to get?
How big is it to the moon? How long does it take?
You're going to grow it. You're obviously going into all sorts of different sectors, right? Different types of organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that John earlier, as he alluded to, we really believe that anyone can be a leader. Not everyone has the opportunity to get leadership development.
Yes.
And absolutely. So, there are a couple language nuances that I try to stay away from. One is development, because we're about the experience.
Okay.
Right. And so if we're creating a healthy experience for the leader, it's really the rock in the lake. You throw the rock in the lake, it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And so we're really focused on creating an experience that reverberates across that team, which if you do that in multiplication, that's a really a strong metric for culture at an organization. And so the idea of going B2C allows us to reach as many people as possible with a low barrier to entry with a high impact. And as we do that, that allows us to do B2B. Now, we obviously are going B2B at the same time, but we want to make it available for whoever wants it.
Sure.
And as we grow, that's,
Yeah, Jane is the tax accounting manager of, Acme Corporation. She wants this, so she starts it for herself. She's going to enlist her team, obviously. They like it because they like what's happening to Jane, right?
Yeah.
And so now you've got this small school of fish swimming in using the same tool. And then before you know it, the organization takes it on. Yeah, I can see that for sure.
And all those fish bring massive data points to our database. And that's the predictive analytics part. We can start to figure out which nudges create the biggest impact. We can get down to, even in your example, in the finance sector, or that field, which areas are picked the most, which Q insights or developmental insights that we give are moving the needle the best, and so on. There's a lot of predictive analytics that can come out of this.
Well, this is cool. I would love to learn more. Your website, people can go to your website now and learn about it. I take it, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And is the price, you see there's a 30-day free trial.
Mm-hmm.
The pricing is up there, I suppose. Honestly haven't looked at it, but the pricing for it is on your website as well.
Yeah, Rob, what is it?
$19.99 per month, per leader. So we don't charge for the number of influencers you have. In fact, we want you to have as many influencers as you feel comfortable with, because the more influencers, the better growth.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really just about
for $20 a month. $20 a month.
Full leader experience.
Well, that's great. So give me the name of your website again. Is it qChange.com?
Yep. The letter qChange.com.
Well, that's pretty easy. That's too easy. I don't know. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to learning more about this wonderful tool and seeing the success that you guys have.
Mark, thank you for your time and energy as well as having us on.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
Talk soon.
Thank you, Mark.